I was standing in my basement when I heard the first crack in the concrete foundation. Not a real crack, mind you. Just the kind of sound that comes when you stack another case of bottled water on top of the others, and the cardboard groans under the weight. I wiped the dust off my hands and stepped back to survey my work. 52 cases, each one holding 24 bottles. That's 1,248 bottles of water, lined up in neat rows along the back wall of my basement, next to the shelves of canned goods, the medical supplies, and the hand crank radio I'd bought 3 years ago and never once needed. My son Michael would have laughed if he'd seen me right then. Hell, he had laughed plenty of times before. "Dad, you're turning into one of those doomsday preppers," he'd said the last time he visited, shaking his head at the rows of supplies like I was hoarding treasure instead of just trying to be ready. "This is Riverside, not some third world country. The water here is fine, you're paranoid." Paranoid. That word stuck with me like a splinter under the skin. I'm 68 years old. I spent 30 years as a civil engineer for the county and another 10 in the army before that. I've seen what happens when infrastructure fails. I've seen pipes burst in the dead of winter, seen treatment plants go offline, seen entire neighborhoods without power for weeks after a storm. I've seen the chaos that follows when people realize too late that the systems they take for granted aren't as reliable as they think. So no, I'm not paranoid. I'm just paying attention. But Michael didn't see it that way. He's 34, works in tech, lives in a nice neighborhood on the east side of Riverside with his wife, Emily, who's 7 months pregnant with their first child. He's got a good job, a good life, and he's never had to worry about where his next meal or his next drink of water is coming from. And I'm glad for that. I worked hard so he wouldn't have to worry. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that security isn't a given. It's something you build, something you prepare for. I climbed the basement stairs and walked into the kitchen, where the late afternoon sun was slanting through the window above the sink. The house was quiet. My wife, Linda, had passed away 4 years ago, and the silence still felt heavy sometimes, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, held it up to the light, and watched the way it caught the sun. Clear, clean, safe, for now. That night, I sat in my recliner with the TV on, half watching the local news. The anchor was talking about a chemical plant on the outskirts of town, some routine inspection that had turned up minor violations. Nothing to worry about, they said. The plant had been fined and they were working on compliance. I made a mental note of it, the way I always did when I heard about things like that. You never know when a minor violation turns into a major problem. My phone buzzed on the side table. A text from Michael. "Hey Dad, Emily and I are coming by this weekend. Want to grab lunch?" I smiled and typed back, "Sounds good. I'll make sure to hide the water bottles so you don't think I've lost my mind." He sent back a laughing emoji. I set the phone down and stared at the TV, but I wasn't really seeing it anymore. I was thinking about Michael, about the way he looked at me sometimes, like I was a relic from another era, someone who couldn't quite keep up with the modern world. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe the water would always run clean, the lights would always stay on, and the world would keep spinning without a hitch. But I've lived long enough to know that maybe isn't good enough when the people you love are counting on you. 3 days later, I was in the garage organizing my tools when I heard the sirens. Not the usual ambulance or fire truck sirens, but something different. A long, wailing tone that seemed to echo through the whole neighborhood. I stepped outside and saw my neighbor, Bill, standing in his driveway, looking up at the sky like he expected to see something there. "You hear that?" he called over to me. "Yeah. What is it?" "Emergency alert, I think. Check your phone." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and saw the notification, a red banner across the screen. "Emergency water contamination alert. Do not use tap water for drinking, cooking, or brushing teeth. Boil water advisory in effect until further notice." My stomach dropped. I read it again, then looked up at Bill. He was staring at his phone too, his face pale. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell happened?" I didn't answer. I was already walking back into my house, my mind racing. I turned on the TV and flipped to the local news. The anchor was on screen, her face tight with urgency. "We're getting reports of a major contamination event at the Riverside Water Treatment Plant. Officials say a chemical leak from the nearby industrial facility has seeped into the water supply. Residents are urged not to use tap water until further notice. We'll bring you more information as it becomes available." I stood there staring at the screen, feeling a strange mix of vindication and dread. This was it. This was exactly the kind of thing I'd been preparing for. But I didn't feel smug or self-satisfied. I felt sick, because I knew what was about to happen next. Within an hour, the panic started. I could see it from my front window. Cars were pulling out of driveways, speeding down the street toward the grocery stores. My phone started buzzing with texts from neighbors, from old friends, all asking the same thing. "Do you have any water? The stores are already out." I didn't respond yet. I needed to think. I needed to figure out who needed help the most. And then my phone rang, Michael's name on the screen. I answered. "Michael." "Dad." His voice was tight, strained. "Did you see the alert?" "Yeah, I saw it. We don't have any water. I mean, we've got maybe 2 bottles in the fridge, but that's it. Emily needs water, Dad. She's pregnant. She can't just..." His voice cracked. "The stores are insane. I just tried to go to 3 different places and they're all sold out. People are fighting over the last cases. I saw a guy punch someone in the parking lot over a 12-pack. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. "It's okay, Michael. I've got water." There was a long pause on the other end. "You? You do?" "Yeah, I've got plenty. I'll bring some over." Another pause. Longer this time. "Dad, He stopped. I could hear him breathing, could almost see him standing there in his kitchen, staring at the empty shelves where he should have had supplies. "I'm sorry. I should have listened to you." "Don't worry about that right now," I said. "Just stay put. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and went down to the basement. I loaded up my truck with 10 cases of water, enough for Michael and Emily to last at least 2 weeks if they were careful. Then I added a few more cases, because I knew there'd be others who needed it too. Neighbors, friends, people who'd called me paranoid but who'd never meant any harm by it. As I drove through Riverside toward Michael's house, I saw the chaos unfolding. Long lines at gas stations, crowds outside the grocery stores, some people shouting, some just standing there looking lost. A police car with its lights flashing parked outside a convenience store. The city was unraveling, and it had only been 2 hours since the alert went out. I thought about all the times Michael had rolled his eyes at me, all the times he'd made jokes about my bunker mentality, and I thought about how easy it is to mock preparation when you've never needed it, how easy it is to call someone paranoid when the world has always worked the way you expected it to. But the world doesn't always work that way, and when it doesn't, the people who prepared aren't the crazy ones anymore. They're the ones everyone turns to. I pulled into Michael's driveway and saw him standing on the front porch, his arms crossed, his face drawn. Emily was behind him, one hand resting on her belly, her eyes red like she'd been crying. I got out of the truck and walked around to the bed, started pulling out the cases of water. Michael came down the steps, moving fast. "Dad, Help me carry these inside," I said, cutting him off. Not because I didn't want to hear his apology, but because there'd be time for that later. Right now, we had work to do. We carried the cases into the house, stacking them in the kitchen and the hallway. Emily hugged me, whispered "thank you" over and over, and I patted her shoulder and told her it was going to be okay. Because it was. They were going to be okay. That's what mattered. When we were done, Michael and I stood in the kitchen, and he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. Respect. Real, unfiltered respect. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About all of it. You weren't paranoid. You were just smart." I shook my head. "I wasn't trying to be right, Michael. I was just trying to be ready. There's a difference." He nodded, and I could see his throat working like he was trying to swallow down something hard. "I want to learn," he said. "I want you to teach me how to do this, how to be prepared, because I've got a kid coming and I can't let this happen again." I looked at him, at the man my son had become, and I felt something shift inside me. Pride, maybe, or relief, or just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the lessons I'd tried to teach him, the ones he'd resisted for so long, had finally taken root. "All right," I said, "we'll start this weekend." And then I got back in my truck, because there were other people who needed help. Other neighbors who didn't have a basement full of water, who didn't have someone like me to call. I drove through Riverside, stopping at houses, handing out bottles, listening to people's thanks and their apologies and their promises to do better next time. By the time I got home, it was dark. The city was still in chaos, but my street was quiet. I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at my house, at the basement where the rest of my supplies were waiting, and I thought about Linda, about how she used to tease me too, but how she'd always supported me, always trusted that I knew what I was doing. "I'm not paranoid," I said out loud, to no one. "I'm just paying attention. And in a world that moves too fast, that forgets too easily, that takes too much for granted, sometimes paying attention is the most radical thing you can do." The water crisis lasted 6 days. 6 days that felt like 6 months, where every hour brought new rumors, new fears, new reasons to panic. The city officials held press conferences every morning, standing behind podiums with strained faces, telling us they were working around the clock to fix the problem. But nobody believed them anymore. Trust, once broken, doesn't come back with a press release. On the second day, the National Guard showed up. They set up distribution points at the high school and the community center, handing out bottled water in rationed amounts. 2 cases per family. People lined up for hours in the heat, tempers flaring, fights breaking out over who'd been there first, who deserved more. I drove past one of the distribution points on my way to check on an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who lived alone 3 streets over. The line stretched for blocks, families with small children, old folks leaning on canes, people who'd never imagined they'd be standing in line for something as basic as water. I'd brought Mrs. Patterson 4 cases, enough to last her through the crisis, and then some. She'd cried when I carried them into her kitchen, gripping my hand with her thin, papery fingers. "You're an angel, Steve," she'd said. I told her I was just a neighbor, but the truth is, I felt something shift in me during those days, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Linda died, like maybe all those years of preparing, all those hours spent organizing supplies and planning for disasters that might never come, had finally meant something. Michael called me every day, sometimes twice a day. He wanted to know what I was doing, how I was managing, what I thought would happen next. But more than that, he wanted to learn. He'd started taking notes, writing down everything I told him about water purification, about food storage, about the importance of having cash on hand when the ATM stopped working. He'd even ordered a water filtration system online, though I told him it probably wouldn't arrive until after the crisis was over. "That's okay," he'd said, "it's for next time." Next time. The fact that he was thinking that way, that he'd finally accepted that there would be a next time, made something in my chest loosen, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. On the 3rd day, the chemical plant that had caused the contamination issued a statement. Corporate lawyers, carefully worded apologies, promises of full accountability, but no real answers. No explanation for how a minor violation had turned into a disaster that left 40,000 people without clean water. I watched the CEO on TV, a man in an expensive suit with perfect hair, reading from a script, and I felt a cold anger settle in my gut. These were the people Michael had trusted, the systems, the institutions, the authorities who were supposed to keep us safe, and they'd failed. Not because they were evil, but because they were careless. Because they'd cut corners, ignored warnings, prioritized profit over safety. That's the thing people don't understand about preparation. It's not about distrusting everyone or thinking the world is ending. It's about recognizing that the people in charge are human. They make mistakes. They get lazy, they fail. And when they do, you need to be ready to take care of yourself and the people you love. By the 4th day, the social fabric of Riverside was starting to fray. I heard reports of break-ins, people stealing water from garages and porches. The police were stretched thin, responding to dozens of calls a day. Bill, my neighbor, told me someone had siphoned gas from his car overnight. "Can you believe that?" he'd said, shaking his head. "In this neighborhood?" I could believe it, because desperation makes people do things they'd never normally do. It strips away the veneer of civilization and reveals what's underneath. Sometimes that's courage and compassion. Sometimes it's something darker. I started keeping my doors locked even during the day. I moved some of my supplies from the basement to the bedroom closet, just in case. Not because I thought my neighbors would hurt me, but because I knew that hungry, thirsty people don't always think clearly, and I wasn't about to let years of preparation go to waste because I'd been too trusting. On the 5th day, Michael showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the garage checking the seals on my emergency generator when I heard his car pull into the driveway. He got out, and I could see immediately that something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. "What happened?" I asked, setting down the wrench. "Emily's in the hospital," he said, his voice shaking. She started having contractions this morning. The doctor said it's probably stress. They're trying to stop the labor, but..." He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "Dad, she's only 30 weeks. If the baby comes now..." I didn't let him finish. "Get in the truck," I said. "We're going to the hospital." "I drove here," he said. "I know, but you're in no state to drive back. Come on." We drove in silence for the first few minutes. Michael stared out the window, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists on his lap. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that Emily and the baby would be fine, but I'd learned a long time ago that empty reassurances don't help. Sometimes you just need to sit with the fear and let it run its course. "I keep thinking," Michael said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "what if this is my fault? What if the stress of all this, the panic, the fear, what if I caused this because I wasn't prepared?" I glanced over at him. "You can't think like that." "Why not? It's true, isn't it? If I'd listened to you, if I'd had water stored, Emily wouldn't have been so scared. She wouldn't have spent 2 days terrified that we wouldn't have enough to drink, that the baby wouldn't be okay. I did this to her." "No," I said firmly. "The people who contaminated the water did this. The people who cut corners and ignored safety protocols did this. You're not responsible for their failures. But I'm responsible for my family," he shot back. "And I failed them." I pulled the truck over to the side of the road and put it in park. Michael looked at me confused. "Listen to me," I said, turning to face him. "You didn't fail anyone. You made a mistake. You underestimated the risks, and you paid a price for it. But you learned from it, and that's what matters. You think I've never made mistakes. You think I've always been prepared for everything." He didn't answer. "When your mother got sick," I continued, my voice rougher than I intended, "I wasn't ready. I thought we had more time. I thought the doctors would fix it, that the treatments would work. I wasn't prepared to lose her. And when she died, I felt like I'd failed her. Like I should have done more, should have seen it coming, should have been ready." Michael's eyes were wet now. "Dad, but the truth is," I said, "you can't prepare for everything. You can't control everything. All you can do is your best. And when you fall short, you learn and you do better next time. That's what being a man is. That's what being a father is. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you've screwed up, and doing whatever it takes to protect the people you love." He nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes. "I'm scared, Dad. I know. So am I." We sat there for a moment, the truck idling on the side of the road, the afternoon sun beating down through the windshield. And then I put the truck back in gear and drove us to the hospital. Emily was in a private room on the 3rd floor, hooked up to monitors that beeped softly in the quiet. She looked small in the hospital bed, her face pale against the white pillows, her hand resting on her belly. Michael went to her immediately, taking her hand, kissing her forehead, whispering things I couldn't hear. I stood by the door, feeling like an intruder, but then Emily looked up and saw me, and she smiled. "Steve," she said, "thank you for bringing him." "Of course," I said. The doctor came in a few minutes later, a young woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. She explained that they'd managed to stop the contractions, that Emily and the baby were stable for now, but she'd need to stay in the hospital for observation, maybe for the rest of the pregnancy. Bed rest, minimal stress, plenty of fluids. "We'll make sure she has everything she needs," the doctor said, looking at Michael, "but she's going to need support at home too. Family, help." Michael nodded. "She'll have it, whatever she needs." After the doctor left, I pulled Michael aside. "I'm going to bring you more supplies," I said. "Food, water, anything you might need so you can focus on Emily and not worry about running to the store." "Dad, you've already done so much." "I'm not asking," I said. "I'm telling you. You take care of your wife. I'll take care of the rest." He looked at me for a long moment and then he hugged me. A real hug, tight and desperate, the kind of hug we hadn't shared since he was a kid. "I love you, Dad," he said into my shoulder. "I love you too, son." On the 6th day, the city finally announced that the water was safe again. The contamination had been cleared, the treatment plant was back online, and residents could resume normal water usage. But the damage was done. People didn't trust the tap water anymore. They didn't trust the officials who'd assured them everything was fine. They didn't trust the systems that had failed them. I went to the grocery store that afternoon and saw the shelves still half empty. People were still buying water in bulk, still stocking up on supplies, still preparing for the next crisis. The store manager, a guy I'd known for years, shook his head as I walked past. "Never seen anything like it," he said. It's like everyone woke up at the same time. I didn't tell him I'd been awake for years. 2 weeks later, Michael invited me over for dinner. Emily was home from the hospital on strict bed rest but doing well. The baby was still holding on, still growing, still safe. Michael had transformed their garage into a makeshift storage area. Shelves lined with water, canned goods, batteries, first aid supplies. He showed it to me with pride, like a kid showing off a school project. "I know it's not as organized as yours," he said, "but it's a start." "It's a damn good start," I said. Over dinner, spaghetti, Emily's favorite, Michael raised his glass of water. "I want to make a toast," he said, "to Dad, for teaching me that being prepared isn't paranoia. It's love." Emily raised her glass too, smiling. "To Steve." I felt my throat tighten. "To family," I said, "and to being ready for whatever comes next." We clinked glasses, and I looked around the table at my son and his wife, at the home they'd built, at the life they were creating. And I thought about all the years I'd spent preparing, all the times I'd been called paranoid, all the moments I'd doubted myself. It had all been worth it. Every case of water, every can of food, every hour spent planning for disasters that might never come. Because when the disaster did come, I'd been ready. And more importantly, I'd been able to protect the people I loved. That's what preparation is really about. It's not about fear or paranoia or distrust. It's about love. It's about looking at the people who matter most and saying, "I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." It's about recognizing that the world is unpredictable, that systems fail, that disasters happen, and deciding that you won't be caught off guard when they do. 3 months later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Linda, after my wife. When Michael called to tell me, I sat in my recliner and cried like I hadn't cried since Linda's funeral. Tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude, that this little girl would come into a world where her father understood the importance of being prepared. I went to visit them in the hospital the next day. Linda, my granddaughter, was tiny and perfect, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through you. I held her carefully, feeling the weight of her in my arms, feeling the responsibility of it. "She's beautiful," I whispered. "She is," Michael said. He was standing next to me, his hand on my shoulder. "And she's lucky, because she's got a grandfather who'll teach her how to be strong, how to be ready, how to take care of herself and the people she loves." I looked up at him, at the man he'd become, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. "We'll teach her together," I said, and we did. Over the years that followed, I taught Michael and little Linda everything I knew: how to purify water, how to start a fire without matches, how to grow food, how to fix things when they break, how to stay calm when everyone else is panicking. I taught them that preparation isn't about expecting the worst, it's about being ready for anything. The water crisis became a turning point for Riverside. The city overhauled its infrastructure, implemented new safety protocols, held the chemical plant accountable. But more than that, it changed the people. They stopped taking clean water for granted. They stopped assuming the systems would always work. They started preparing. And me, I kept doing what I'd always done, stocking supplies, staying ready, paying attention, because that's who I am. Not paranoid, not a doomsday prepper, just a man who understands that the world is fragile, that security is something you build, not something you assume. And when the next crisis comes, because there will always be a next crisis, I'll be ready. My family will be ready. And maybe, just maybe, the people who once called me paranoid will remember the lesson they learned when the water stopped flowing. That being prepared isn't crazy. It's the sanest thing you can do.